we can perform the magic that we performed yesterday by somehow staying on track. Our first speaker will be a keynote of anti-trafficking policies in the region. And that will be by Lamine Daff from the International Center for Migration Policy Development in Nigeria. He's someone who has been a leader in this space for a very long time. I think we have a lot to learn here. There's over 15 years of experience, particularly in West Africa, and now as the Senior Project Manager and Anti-Trafficking Portfolio Leader in their Regional Office for West Africa. He'll have some really great perspectives for all of us. And please remind me, Lamine, parlez-vous le français or l'anglais?
I will speak English.
English. Okay, great. So now I do believe we have some instructions in our chat on how to get again to the French and English translation. Again, there's a little globe icon that says interpretation. You will click there and then click to the language you need. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Davina. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, great. So thank you very much to the Free the Slave team for extending this invitation to my organization and to give us the opportunity to address this large audience. So first of all, I would like to introduce the organization. The International Center for Migration Policy Development, ICMPD, which I represent, is an institution in the intergovernmental organization founded in 1993. We support governments on the whole migration management spectrum, and our approach is articulated around three pillars that are interconnected. First of all is policy and research, capacity building, and migration dialogue. I think yesterday, a colleague from UNODC mentioned a very important dialogue, migration dialogue, which brings together the 53 African and European countries to discuss migration-related issues. And just to mention that ICMPD holds the secretariat of this dialogue, which is called the Rabat process, the EU-Africa dialogue on migration and development. So I've been tasked to provide a snapshot of the anti-trafficking policies in West Africa. Where do we stand? What has been achieved so far? What are the main challenges? And provide some nuggets on the way forward. So I will not elaborate more on the context because I believe this has been extensively discussed yesterday. But my contribution would be to basically share some, like a key thread that could be useful in our discussion. We all acknowledge that laws and policies derived from the international obligation and from the international instrument that all our countries have adhered to. However, we need to appreciate that these laws and policies are not implemented in a vacuum. So we need to take into consideration the social fabric in which those interventions, those policies, and those laws should be implemented. So to that effect, laws and policies need to be shaped in the way to alleviate any resistance that might occur in the context of the implementation, especially with communities, with societies who have already established values, norms, and also institutions to govern the society. So this is something that I believe should also contribute to our discussion. So looking at the picture of this anti-trafficking policy in West Africa, since the advent of the Palermo Protocol in 2000, many countries were encouraged to implement the provision of the Palermo Protocol. And in West Africa, or in Africa, I must say that the ECOWAS region was at the forefront of this movement, like in 2001, so less than a year after the adoption of the Palermo Protocol, ECOWAS head of state adopted a declaration on the fight against trafficking in person. They also tasked the Commission and its relevant department to establish a coordination mechanism in 2007 with bringing together anti-trafficking coordinator from the member states. They also established a reporting mechanism whereby each member state, through the anti-trafficking coordinator, report on an annual basis to the ECOWAS Commission on the status quo of the counter-trafficking response. They also have an annual review meeting, which brings together all these anti-trafficking coordinator. And this platform enable the member state to also basically engage and also benchmark on some key standards that they could replicate in their respective countries. So the ECOWAS has elaborated a whole gamut of regional normative instruments that is guiding the member states in the implementation of various policies and so on and so forth. The most popular one, of course, is the ECOWAS Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons, which has 7 strategic objectives, which cuts across the pillar prevention, protection, prosecution, and of course, partnership. And what I must say is that this ECOWAS Plan of Action serve as a blueprint for the national plan of action in the respective countries. So looking at the picture that we have currently now, I must emphasize that all the ECOWAS member states have established an anti-trafficking plan of action. The most recent one at Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, and Ghana. They also have dedicated anti-trafficking coordinators, something that I already mentioned. And in some countries, like for instance in Nigeria, they have established community-based coordination structure in a way to decentralize this coordination at the state level. Looking at the legislation, because I believe this will be discussed in the subsequent panel, so it's important to appreciate the fact that all ECOWAS member states have adopted either standalone legislation on trafficking in person or have incorporated the provision into their criminal code and so on and so forth. However, one of the challenges is that the protection aspect is left out. So it's important that we have a more robust legislation. And I believe for instance, in the case of Guinea, they used to have the provision, TIP provision in the criminal code, but recently they have engaged in the process that led to the adoption by the parliament of a new legislation on trafficking in person, but which is yet to be enacted by the authorities. Looking at the cooperation agreements, we have, as we all know, the Palermo Protocol promotes international cooperation in terms of investigation, in terms of prosecution, but also in terms of providing support to victims of trafficking. So there are 2 key regional framework or regional agreement that have been signed at the ECOWAS level. The Multilateral Cooperation Agreement on the fight against child trafficking in West Africa in 2005, and in 2006, the Multilateral Cooperation Agreement on the fight against trafficking in person, especially women and children. But to complement these efforts, it's also important to also have bilateral agreements, and there are a few of them that are projected here on the slide. What I would like also to mention is that ICMPD carried out a study to assess, appraise the implementation status of this agreement across the region, and so far we have counted over 27 agreements across the region that tackle the issue of trafficking in person and facilitate or provide an implied framework for member states to engage on those issues. Sorry, I'm rushing a bit because of the time that was allocated, but of course this slide will be shared with you after this session. So looking at the protection and rehabilitation, we have the legislation has evolved to make more provision for victims of trafficking. We have recently in Sierra Leone, I believe, colleagues from Centro will present the work they did that helps support or securing this new anti-trafficking law, which make provision for a trust fund for victims of trafficking. What I would like also to mention is that we have a lot of challenges when it comes to the data repository for the TIP cases. When you look at, for instance, when you have a look at the report that we receive from the member states, we see that there is discrepancy in the data that are communicated by countries when it comes to the return and reintegration of victims of trafficking. So there's some, we need to engage more with these countries to make sure that there's this gap between the data provided or shared are closer, are more consistent. So in terms of prosecution, so based on the report that we received from the member states between 2021 and 2022, the authorities of ECOWAS member states, ECOWAS member states have secured 474 prosecution and 197 conviction. In total, approximately over 13,000 victims were supported. Now, looking at the common challenges that the country faces, first of all is the issue of engaging with the victims of trafficking during the criminal proceedings. This is a common challenge because most of the time the law enforcement agencies, when you engage with them, they don't know where to put, so to speak, the victims during these criminal proceedings. So, and this revolves around the fact that either we don't have enough shelters or it's not well equipped in terms of resource person and so on and so forth. There's also a need to improve or allocate more funding to the national referral mechanism with to cater for the basic needs of the victims of trafficking. The issue of collusion of criminal network with law enforcement has been also mentioned in our engagement with the stakeholders. We see that, for instance, when law enforcement are planning a raid, for instance, based on the tip of the network received, they fail to succeed. There's also the issue of bias among law enforcement, which affect or impede the capacity of the victim to report the case. The issue also of out-of-court settlement in lieu of conviction and legal redress has become an issue, and we need to identify or address this challenge that they're also facing when it comes to the victim accessing to justice. The lack of coordination between specialized investigative units. I'm looking at cybercrime, money laundering. We know that trafficking in persons is a predicate crime to money laundering, so it's important to establish this link between the units for more efficiency during the investigation. So I still have one or two slides. So
Lamine, are you there? Seems as though he may be having some technical difficulties. Hello? Okay, seems as though we've lost Lamine. But I would just like to encourage everyone, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us again today. I am Giselle Balfour. Lamine is having some technical difficulties. I believe his internet may have frozen. And so we're going to give him a couple of seconds. But in the meantime, if you have any questions at any point throughout this, the proceedings today, there is a Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Some of you may be to the top of your screen, not the regular chat, but it specifically has a question mark. And it may have the letters Q&A on it. We encourage you to put your questions in there. We will ensure that any of the panelists, and please let us know which of the panelists you're asking this question to. We will ensure that the panelists are able to engage with you and answer any of the questions that you may have. If you put it in the regular chat, it can get lost. So we are asking if you put it in Q&A so that we can see your questions and get your questions answered. Okay. So thank you so much. Lamine, are you back? If not, I will hand back over to our host, Davina. And hopefully when Lamine comes back, we can have him sort of finish his presentation. Davina, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much. And yes, we'll definitely be hearing, I'm sure, from Lamine later. Thank you, Dr. Belcourt. So now we'll move on to our prosecution case study presentation on prosecuting trafficking cases in the region, lessons learned. And this will be presented by Legal Aid Forum Rwanda. Now, obviously, between like truth and reconciliation committees and different things that have had a strong legacy in Rwanda, I think this is going to be a very interesting presentation. And of course, this organization has really reformed and changed legal aid policy, legal aid bills, reforms of the penal code and criminal procedure codes, and many other pieces of legislation to protect the vulnerable people in Rwanda. And there's a significant amount of research also feeding into this project from the African Center of Excellence for Access to Justice. So now on to our colleagues from the Legal Aid Forum in Rwanda.
Thank you very much, Davina. And hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia. I work at the Legal Aid Forum. And it's a great pleasure to be part of this team. And it's very nice seeing familiar faces to those that we were with in the 2022 African Regional Forum in Kigali. Nice to see you all. I hope everyone is doing amazing. So as Davina mentioned, at the Legal Aid Forum in Rwanda, it's basically a legal aid organization, an organization that provides legal aid specifically to the vulnerable people. And we all know that given the nature of the crime of human trafficking, survivors or victims, when they're still victims, have a very bigger extent of vulnerability. So this is why the Legal Aid Forum came in, and we provide a holistic services to victims and survivors of human trafficking. So in our presentation today, we were asked to talk about prosecuting trafficking cases in the region, specifically in Rwanda. And excuse me, and we thought it could be good if we shared a case study, a practical case study that the Legal Aid Forum has worked on. So, and before we share a practical example or a case study that the Legal Aid Forum that has assisted, we wanted to first tell you about a little bit in Rwanda, what's the situation like in Rwanda in regards to human trafficking. So we have a law, I think my colleague, the director yesterday mentioned something detailed about the legal framework and the policies that Rwanda has in regards to fighting human trafficking. So we have a law and it has been in place since 2018. And so you can imagine Rwanda considered or started considering the crime of human trafficking as a crime on its own, as a standalone crime since 2018. And from that period to 2022, because that's the data that we have, it shows that from 2018 to 2022, 90 cases of human trafficking. These are cases that have been classified to be cases of human trafficking. Only 90 cases have been investigated of human trafficking. And among those, only 37 were prosecuted. So you can imagine only the 90 cases themselves are still few, but again, not all these 90 cases, these are the cases that were investigated in the investigation process, and some were dropped. Only 37 were prosecuted by the national authority. These are only the cases that were taken to court. So you can wonder, where are others? What happened? So in the whole process, that's what we want to talk about. The challenges that are involved in prosecuting human trafficking cases. Is it really the issue that there are lesser cases of human trafficking in Rwanda? Is it really the issue that only 37 cases qualified to be human trafficking cases that have evidence and everything to go in court? No, there are many challenges that come with prosecuting human trafficking cases, and that's what I will be sharing briefly about. But before we dive deeper in the challenges and the whole process involved in prosecuting human trafficking cases, we wanted to share a little bit about one practical case that is very recent that the Legal Aid Forum assisted in victims of human trafficking. This is a case that started way back in 2015. And this case involved two young ladies, Rwandan girls, who were trafficked in Uganda, to Uganda, by a Rwandan businessman who was operating his business in Uganda and Rwanda. So he managed to talk to the families of these girls and under false hopes of jobs. So he took these girls to Uganda, and reaching there, these girls just found out that it was something totally different. They were sexually exploited, they were forced into some kind of forced labor and everything. So this is when these girls realized that, hey, this is not a job we were brought to do in Uganda. So they contacted their families back in Rwanda, and their families managed to talk to the authorities. But mind you, these ladies had traveled to Uganda illegally, like they didn't have all the travel documents and everything. So they had the fear to tell the authorities. So they thought maybe if we mentioned anything with the immigration, we are going to be charged of different, maybe traveling with no documents and everything. So they had the fear to go to the embassy or other authorities. So they told their parents back in Rwanda, and the parents managed to talk to our investigation bureau and the immigration department. So the collaboration between the immigration department, our investigation bureau, and the police managed to prepare how these young girls could be repatriated back in Rwanda. So it was a success. They were repatriated back in Rwanda. And upon reaching in Rwanda, we have, yesterday the director talked about an organ that the government of Rwanda has put in place. We call it Isange One Stop Center. This is a government organ that specifically provides shelter to the victims of human trafficking. But this is a temporary shelter for only 3 months. So these girls were taken to the shelter at Isange One Stop Center, from where now they were referred to the Legal Aid Forum, since prosecution proceedings were now open and they were going to face the court and everything. So they were referred to the Legal Aid Forum. This is when we came in representing these girls in court. Prosecution proceedings started from there, and this man was arrested. How was he arrested? I mentioned earlier that he was a businessman who used to do his business, dark business, between Uganda and Rwanda. So one of the days he was traveling freely, as he used to do in Rwanda, and he was arrested at the border. So he was brought in Rwanda and tried before the courts in Rwanda, and he was proved guilty. He was found guilty and sentenced to 8 years of imprisonment. So I want to talk now the whole process, like how was the prosecution process like in this particular case? So we're asked to share our experience, like during the prosecution, how were the victims handled? What were the challenges? How were they protected? How were they prepared? So in this specific case, one thing for sure is that the government has put in place measures that safeguard or protect the victims during prosecution proceedings. So during the entire process, even when these girls were coming before court, of course, assisted by the lawyers of the Legal Aid Forum, their identity was protected. So they were protected. First of all, they were still in the shelters that I mentioned earlier. They were in the shelters, but again, their identity was protected. This case was not on camera, like it wasn't published. It was behind the camera. No one was allowed to interview the victims nor come closer to them. So their identity was completely protected during the entire prosecution proceedings. Not only their identity, but also their family. Their families were protected. So in Rwanda, this is a crime that is really not spoken of publicly in the country. Some people tend to have a lot of myths, or they don't speak about it openly. So the government put in place measures that whenever there is a victim, even let the protection not only come to the survivor, but let it be extended to their families. So their families were also given protection in that maybe the perpetrator or any other person working with the perpetrator couldn't come closer to them to harm them or even destroy the evidences that could be there. So their identity was protected, their families were protected. Another thing that was that we observed in this case, these victims were not held liable for any crimes that they committed during the process of when they were being trafficked. So I mentioned earlier that they had illegally traveled without legal travel documents. So the fear that they had, maybe when we come back to Rwanda, they're going to try us before courts. So there are even other crimes that the perpetrator was claiming that these girls did when they were in Uganda. But the prosecution said no, in case there are any other crimes that the victim may have committed during the process when they were being trafficked or during, so they are not considered. So this is something that is really nice or very good that protects the victims during the prosecution proceedings. It gives them the confidence to come before the court without saying, or maybe after this case, some other case may come up against me. So that's a really good safeguarding measure that we observed in this particular case. Again, we all know that when it comes to courts, there are costs that are always related or that come with filing cases, maybe executing your judgments and everything. So, but specifically to the victims of human trafficking, they are exempted from any costs. So during the prosecution process, any costs or any financial costs that would be expected or incurred during the prosecution process, the victims are completely exempted from paying them. This is something that is always good, or that we've seen to be a very good protective measure for the victims, since some of them are financially vulnerable. So you could imagine if a victim or a survivor doesn't have the means to file a case, the means to do all the things, maybe bring in experts in case they are needed. So they could be discouraged to file cases or appear before courts simply because of their financial vulnerability. But this is something that we've seen the government really do a good thing about, exempting any costs that could be required of the victim. Then lastly, as a good safeguarding practice that we saw specifically in this case, the prosecution requested the court to order that properties of the perpetrator could be confiscated. So this man, the perpetrator had some businesses in Rwanda and Uganda. So he had an office in Rwanda where he used to carry out, like connect the victims and the perpetrators. So the prosecution, not only in this case and other cases that we've seen being prosecuted or undergoing prosecution, the prosecutor or the prosecution requests that every act or businesses or anything that really or have something to do with the perpetrator should be confiscated during the prosecution proceedings. So this not only helps in collecting evidence, but also helps the prosecution to be sure that maybe some evidences are not going to be destroyed during the prosecution process. So these and a few others are some good protective and safeguarding practices that we've seen in cases that we've handled at the Legal Aid Forum or assisted in during the prosecution process. However, there are some challenges. There are many challenges. As I mentioned earlier, we saw that 90 cases were investigated, but not all these cases managed to be brought before court. Not all these cases were prosecuted. So only 37 were prosecuted. You could imagine why. So there are many challenges, one being insufficient evidence. We've seen that for sure, and I've heard even yesterday people were talking about that. Some presenters mentioned that the lack of sufficient evidences really hinders prosecution processes in human trafficking cases. This is something that we also observed firsthand during this case that we were assisting as the Legal Aid Forum, where victims even don't remember what happened. If they really don't have what to prove in court. And as lawyers, some of you, many of you know that if you don't have evidence, it just turns out that you could lose the case. So the barrier of insufficient evidence or even inconsistency, some survivors really don't find it easy to provide evidence as the prosecution requires, which is a very big challenge that we've seen in the prosecution processes. Not only that, there's a challenge of the lengthy prosecution proceedings. So I mentioned that this case started in 2018, but the perpetrator was sentenced. The criminal case was closed in 2020, but to date now, we filed another civil case requesting for damages for these survivors. But this civil case is still ongoing now in 2024. So you could imagine the length of the proceedings. So that length itself could discourage a victim or any other person that wants to file a case. And when you think that maybe it would take 5 years, more than 5 years, this could be a barrier for some people or survivors to come up and want to open for prosecution proceedings of the cases. So the lengthy proceedings of the prosecution processes are a very big challenge to the prosecution of the cases. One more thing, my colleague mentioned earlier, the preceding presenter talked about the knowledge of some law enforcers who really don't know how to handle cases of human trafficking. This is something that we saw firsthand during this case, during the prosecution. So the prosecution is used to prosecuting criminal cases, like you have a criminal, a suspect before you, and you're asking them openly and the victim there, a victim of any criminal case. But when it comes to human trafficking cases, we think it's always important that these survivors are given special treatment, not like any other victim. Why? Because it's something that it's a lived experience they've gone through, something that sometimes some acts that were committed against them really affected them, their dignity and everything, and they don't feel okay sharing the evidences before court. But during prosecutions, we've observed that there are challenges where the prosecutor just brings in the survivor. Okay, tell us what happened. This is not how you should be interrogating or the survivor of human trafficking, as opposed to anyhow you could pose a question to any other survivor, a victim of any criminal case. So this is also a challenge that we've seen in our prosecution when it comes to interrogating survivors. So we feel like there is need that people or law enforcers in the prosecution, in the investigation, all those law enforcers be trained or maybe be trained on how to handle cases of human trafficking. I mentioned earlier that we have a shelter. We have an organ that provides shelter to the survivors, but it's only for 3 months. So you could imagine these survivors that we were assisting at the Legal Aid Forum, they were only sheltered for 3 months. So after 3 months, these people don't have where to go. They are not financially stable. So it's also a challenge that could disrupt persecution. And the persecution was going on even after the 3 months, even after 1 year. But these ladies didn't have the financial stability to establish themselves, to find a place where to be. So this was a barrier to them. They couldn't even appear before courts in some instances because they didn't have a safe space to be in. So this is also a critical challenge that we observed that has been a barrier to the prosecution proceeding. So these are a few things that we wanted to highlight. One, in a specific case that the Legal Aid Forum assisted. And for now, thank you very much for your kind attention. Okay. Back to you, Giselle.
Thank you, Cecilia. And we have a couple of questions for you from our participants. So the first question says, could you explain how the protection of victim family is done?
Yes, that's a very good question. So families, they were protected in that it was only the closer family, not the entire extended family. But the government put, the prosecution requested that the court should put security people. There were security forces that were deployed in the family, especially their parents, their home area. So the family were guarded for a period of 3 months. Again, it wasn't a long period, but at least during the proceedings, their close family members, and again, constantly asking them at the local authorities. The local authorities would usually ask them, any threats? Are you getting any threats from anyone in relation to the case that was ongoing, the prosecution case that was ongoing? So the constant checking on the family members. Are you getting any threats? In case you face any threat, please come forward, report any threat. So the families were also given such protection. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we had another question that says, how do you work with the government on prosecution? And they wanted to know if the center you mentioned was supported by the government.
Yes. The center that I mentioned, the shelter, I'm thinking you're talking about the shelter, the Isanya One Stop. Yes. It's a government organ. It's a government organ that was put by the government to provide shelters, temporal shelter for the survivors. So how did we work with the government? So the Legal Aid Forum, we are well known in the country, in Rwanda, to provide legal aid, pro bono legal services to any vulnerable groups of people. These could be children facing any legal issue. So in case of any legal issue that needs a lawyer, they know the people that provide pro bono legal services. So the government knows the Legal Aid Forum to be the only or one of the leading legal aid provider in Rwanda. So they know every time they have a victim of human trafficking, they refer to us the cases to provide legal representation. So that's how the government or the immigration came in contact with the Legal Aid Forum and told us, we have a case, these people need legal representation, and we know that you've been providing free legal services to vulnerable people. Can you handle this case? And yes, it falls into our mandate. We've been doing this. We're always very open to receive cases, especially of human trafficking. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I don't want to put you in the hot seat, but we have lots of questions coming in. So just a couple more. It seems that your presentation raised a lot of great questions. And so, we have a participant who said, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. And they want to know what mechanisms can be put in place to improve the quality of evidence gathered for trafficking cases.
Well, that's a very good question that I even thought the whole forum could think about. This is not the issue only in Rwanda. I think even the other presenters mentioned that we're having this challenge of presenting evidence for sure, I think there's something that has to be done so that survivors or the victims get a way to present the evidence. We've seen that there is no way prosecutions are going to go on without evidence. So I'm going to open this question to everyone to provide their insights. What do you think should be done? Because this is not only an issue in Rwanda, but for sure this is a very challenging issue that the prosecution faces when it comes to presenting evidence. How is it presented? How are we going to collect it in the first place? Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is definitely something that is, and it's not just a problem in Africa, it's everywhere in the world. We have to really work on the quality of evidence to ensure that trafficking cases are able to be prosecuted successfully. So thank you for that. And so another participant asked, what are you doing, or not just you, but Legal Aid Forum in general, doing to educate law enforcement and the judges on the non-punishment principle?
The non-punishment principle to the victims?
Yeah. So, and I know Mr. Kananga spoke about the non-punishment principle yesterday, yes. But is there anything that's being done? It's kind of being rolled out sort of globally. And so we want to know if there's any education being provided to law enforcement and judges on this.
Very true. So we have that specific provision in our law. So the law, the anti-human trafficking law of Rwanda provides that as the non-punishment provision that no victim should be punished for any crime that they would have committed during the time they are trafficked. But what the Legal Aid Forum is doing, as our mandate, we also do research and advocacy. So we've been doing a lot of advocacy and educating law enforcers on this specific provision. So we know laws could be in place, very good laws, but their implementation comes in some challenges. So we try every time we are handling a human trafficking case, every time we are conducting an awareness session to educate the people on the crime of human trafficking. We always highlight this to law enforcers, just to remind them it is in the law. It is your duty to protect the victims, even when they could have committed other crimes during the process. So we've done this, and I think it's something that is continuous. Every time we have sessions or education sessions on human trafficking in general, we always highlight this to law enforcers.
Thank you so much. And we do have a few more questions, but we are out of time. I want to say a great thank you to Cecilia for her time. Maybe afterwards she can, do the answer in the chat, some of these questions. Yes, fantastic questions. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for providing your questions. And thank you, Cecilia, for being so gracious in answering these questions. So I'm going to hand these duties back over to Davina. Davina, we do have Lamine. So if you would like to have Lamine come back, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. And Dr. Balfour, excellent job moderating those questions. So just a reminder, I know Dr. Balfour said this, but remember to put those questions in the Q&A chat because they're getting lost in the broader chat with everyone's wonderful greetings from throughout the world. This went really well. Thank you, Dr. Balfour. Okay, so now, Lamine, I think you were just finishing up your last two slides when we lost connection, maybe the last two or last slide. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that.
Thank you so much. Sorry about this break. The internet just went off. Yes, I just would like to conclude and also address some of the questions that were shared with me. So first of all I would like to go back to a new approach that we are trying to develop in West Africa. I will start by saying that there is a brief that was issued by the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Person, the ICAT, which promotes which is calling for a broader strategic approach to reduce the incidence of trafficking in persons. So we acknowledge that trafficking in persons is inextricably linked to precursor offenses such as SGBV, violence against the children, forced labor. And whenever I engage with the law enforcement or the criminal justice in general in the various countries that I work with, we always ask this question. So when you don't have all the constituent elements of trafficking in persons, can you still prosecute? Do you still have the provision in your legislation that will allow you to prosecute for individual offenses? And sometimes it's not that evident. So it's really important that there is no break in the chain, and because we know that there's a lot of weaknesses and shortcomings in the criminal justice response. Also, this brings me back to one of the impediments to the reporting, the capacity of the victims to report cases, whether it's for rape, whether it's for child battery, and so on and so forth. So the lack of conducive referral center that will enable the victim to report the case, also to perform forensics, collect the evidence to be then transmitted to the police, and so on and so forth. This is quite lacking as well. So it's quite important. Based on this, it's quite important to, first of all, to acknowledge that trafficking in person is a very specific offense. It requires a lot of expertise. The specialist response to the offense of trafficking in person must be maintained. However, it's equally important to keep in mind this broader strategic approach, which enable us to approach trafficking in person as part of a larger, complex set of vulnerabilities that needs to be adequately catered for. We have few examples, like for instance, in Nigeria, the trafficking in person offense and the violence against the person offenses are within the remit of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons in Nigeria. That's the NAPTIP. So they have developed a whole gamut of instruments to ease the coordination between law enforcement agencies which have specific mandates. We also have instances in Guinea or in Sierra Leone where they have developed protocol for the referral of GBV, gender-based violence cases. So those were my last two slides. So if you permit me, I will then address some of the questions that were raised in the chat. Do I still have time for that?
Yes, you do.
Okay, all right, great. So there were two questions. The first is from Mr. Stefan. The numbers share only indicated children and women. Are they men? Is there also a breakdown on forms of trafficking in the statistic? Yes, indeed. The statistic that I share with you came from the reports that we received from the national institution in the different member states. Those statistics cuts across the number of victims reported, the number of conviction, the number of prosecution, and so on and so forth. And of course, the majority of the victims that were supported are women and children. However, we do have men that have been identified. Actually, there is a phenomenon that is actually becoming more concerning, where you have men who are forced to commit cyberscam. This is becoming very recurrent across the region, and I believe that in other regions as well, we have a lot of cases that have been reported. So this is like a typical case of victims of trafficking involving male adults. The second question is, there is a CSO's mechanism called the West African Coalition, WACTIPSOM, established in 2022. Yeah, indeed, I know the platform. I know also the West African Network for the Protection of Children, and then in a situation of mobility. So these are very important platforms who are doing a fantastic job when it comes to the regional, to the referral of cases, cross-border referral of cases. What I would like to add to that is that, and this is something that I was trying to mention before we got cut, we have, when you analyze the reports we receive from the member states, especially when it comes to cross-border referral of cases, you see that there is no reasonable match between the reports. For instance, country A will indicate or claim that they have returned 25 victims during that reporting period to their country B. When you analyze the same for the same period, the report from country B of their national who came back from country A, we find out that probably out of those 20 victims that were claimed by country A, you will probably have you'll probably see 5 victims. So you see that there's a discrepancy in the rate. So it's really important to address this issue as well. And this is actually part of a process that we initiated last year, where we supported the ECOWAS member state in the adoption of the adoption of guidelines for the regional referral mechanism for victims of trafficking, which outline the steps that need to be taken from the identification all the way to the return and reintegration of victims of trafficking, if this is what is chosen as an option. But of course, for a regional referral mechanism to be effective, you need strong national referral mechanism. Otherwise, it will defeat the whole purpose. So thank you very much. Those were my comments.
Thank you so much, Lamine, and thank you all for your questions. We hand back over to Davina.
Yes, thank you. That was excellent. Another great facilitated discussion. And thank you for finishing that up, Lamine. So now we move on to our third panel, the impact of legislation on vulnerable groups in Africa. And the moderator is again our colleague Evans Munga with Terra Dahome in Kenya. He's did a great job doing this yesterday, and so I'm trusting you, Evans, to be able to do this. He's worked with lots of great groups, and I think I mentioned this yesterday. He has substantial experience throughout the African region, and he has been really working on. He's been receiving a lot of awards and really focused on child protection and exploitation throughout his very long career. Also, this is a note for all of our speakers. You'll be able to find their full bios online. This is more our introduction during the panel. So on to you, Evan.
Thank you very much, and welcome again, participants and panelists. In this session, we are going to discuss the impact of legislation targeting vulnerable groups in Africa. And we are going to tackle some vulnerable groups, especially those are targeted by traffickers, that is the LGBTQ. And we also have the disability, children, and of course, migrants. My panelists are coming from Uganda, Kenya, and of course, myself from Kenya. We are going to have panelists. I'm going to quickly read their bio so that you get to know who are the panelists and their experience and background. We have John Grace coming from Uganda Minority Shelters Consortium. John Grace is a national coordinator for the Uganda Minority Shelters Consortium, a network of protection, not-for-profits that support LGBTQ victims of violence and homelessness in Uganda. As the head of UMSC, they are passionate about ensuring that the LGBTQ victims of violence and homelessness who often face discrimination, violence, and prosecution in Uganda have access to safe and supportive spaces. Greatness firsthand and challenge endured by them. Next, we also
Hello, Evans, your internet is freezing up. Can you hear me? You're muted.
Yes, and
There
of course, Lillian is going to talk to us on issues of immigrants, and John Grace is going to talk to us on issues of LGBTQ. Last, we have Rachel Wahome from Kituo cha Sheria. Rachel Wahome is a refugee law and protection specialist, currently working with the Kituo cha Sheria. She has a proven track record for success in forced displacement that focus and continues to be a valuable asset in advocating for women's rights and improving the lives of refugees. So as you've heard, Rachel is going to talk to us on issues of refugees, of course, looking at how refugees are vulnerable on issues of human trafficking. Because John Grace requested to start first, I'm going to hand over to John Grace to start us off on the issues of LGBTQ and, of course, the impact of legislation, especially to LGBTQ as vulnerable groups in trafficking. Over to you, John Grace. You're here? John Grace, you can hear us? The issues of internet can always mess. We can, as we wait for John Grace, I think we can quickly move to Lillian, who is going to talk to us on issues of migrants. As soon as John Grace comes, then we're going to switch. Over to you, Lillian. Please proceed. And for the participants, kindly just put your questions on the Q&A chat. We'll be able to follow through and, of course, put them through to the participants. Lillian, proceed.
Thank you so much, Evans, and for the organizers of this particular session. I'm really excited to have been invited. I'm trying to also share my screen at the same time. I'm really honored to have been invited to be part of this session today so that I can talk about matters of migrants and how they actually fall under vulnerable groups. So I just want to please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes,
we can.
I can.
Okay. So my name is Lillian Obie, and I work with International Detergent Coalition. I'm the Africa Regional Manager, and I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. I have worked with migrants for such a long time, and especially migrants in vulnerable situations. And that is also the work that we do at IDC, where we advocate for better ways where migrants can be placed in the community as opposed to being put in detention. So this is very important for this particular session that we are talking as migrants, as vulnerable people, so that we can see the interlink of how when a migrant is traveling from one country to another and then they're exposed to exploitation, how that, I want to say, enhances their vulnerability in a way that they should not, and also exposes them to even further exploitation. So as IDC, we are a network organization, and our members are in over 75 countries, and our membership is from civil society who are working on different matters that relate to migration. Our approach is centered on ending immigration detention. And here I would like us to also look at survivors of trafficking also as people who might end up in immigration detention by the mere fact that they have moved from one country to another. And we have a strong track record of working with governments, UN entities, and also civil society actors. How we work is that we focus on solutions, and our work is also collaborative in nature, and we also really are big on partnerships. And we have ample experience working with governments, and we are actually the international leads when it comes to alternatives to detention, which I'll mention as we are continuing. I'd like us to just look at why is this important when we're talking about survivors of trafficking and we're talking about the immigration detention. Is that number one, at the international and regional. And even at the national level, we always talk about right to liberty, which is also sometimes talked as the right or freedom of movement. And it's contained in all international instruments. For instance, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have the Convention on Migrant Workers. So I picked the conventions that are particular to this particular session, and also we have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's important because also sometimes when persons are trafficked, the traffickers might hide their passport documents, so they might not know how to proceed without their travel documents. Sometimes they'll be held and their visas will expire. So the traffickers will threaten the person that we will report you because of your illegal stay and presence, because you no longer have valid documents to remain in the country. So that is why it's important for us to look at the right to liberty and also freedom of movement of persons who will end up being vulnerable, especially because if they will be exploited by their traffickers and because of their migration status. So this right to liberty is not unlimited. The international and human rights law and immigration detention is not arbitrary. So we have guidance from human rights bodies highlighting the need for states to abolish immigration detention. So when I say immigration detention, it is the offense of being found in a country without proper documents. And until that is achieved, because that is what the momentum is at the regional and international level, states are encouraged to come up with alternative ways of dealing with migrants who are in vulnerable situations in a country, and also including survivors of trafficking, so that they might find other ways to stay in the country and not be penalized or put in detention because of their migration status. And then we have non-criminalization of migration, because my topic was highlighting the vulnerability of migrants, is that the principle of non-criminalization of migration means that states are not supposed to use either the penal law or the Immigration Act to have sanctions or penalties for illegal entry or presence. So that means if you are a foreigner who's gone into a country, even if your passport expires or you don't have proper documents, then you should not be penalized under criminal law. And then irregular entry or stay is not a violent act nor a crime against the person, property, or national security. While this, I'd say the offense of being in a country without proper documents, it should constitute an administrative offense, meaning it should not be penalized under criminal law. Irregular migration is not a crime. So that one I really want to overemphasize. Irregular migration should therefore never be considered a criminal offense or have consequences similar to those arising from criminal activity, such as all those penalties that are usually found in the penal law. And migrants in an irregular situation, including even survivors of trafficking, are not criminals because of their migration status and should not be treated as such, meaning that they should not be put in detention. And so that is where the international and criminal law is going in terms of promising practices and best practices. And my next slide is talking about presumption against detention. So because the first point is that when you are in a country without proper documents, you should not be penalized for it under criminal law, is that there is a presumption against detention. And this is for migrants, because if you're a migrant in a foreign country, sometimes, and if not most times, you're in a vulnerable situation because you might not know where the immigration office is, you might not know the complex nature of regularizing your stay, and not to forget that you are afraid of producing yourself to the authorities to regularize yourself because you're afraid that you will be penalized and put in detention. So you can now see why it's important that this particular move at the international and regional level is realized at the national level and in the laws. So the principle against detention of migrants is that, first of all, states should find alternative ways to have migrants stay in the community. And this is by removing the penalty in the immigration acts that people have, and even in the criminal law and the penal law that they have, to remove the offense of being found in a country illegally as a criminal offense, because, as we have said, it's an administrative offense in nature. So a presumption against detention of all persons with irregular migration exists in national legislations, and I've tried to highlight some of the countries that have this, such as Uganda, Zimbabwe, and even South Africa. We also have national laws in Africa that seek to protect vulnerable groups of migrants from immigration detention, which is detention because of their migration status. And such as I have highlighted the Uganda Refugee Act there, that does not allow for the detention of people who are seeking asylum. We've also put the Djibouti Refugee Act there as an example. Put the South Africa Refugee Act there. However, they currently have a white paper that is threatening the asylum space in the country. So that is just an example of how countries in their own way are trying to end the immigration detention of persons in irregular situations, such as asylum seekers. And now we talk about the detention of children and what alternative measures exist. Number one, children or migrant children should never be penalized because of their migration status, number one, or they should never be penalized for the migration status of their parents or an adult that they were traveling with. This is also because the fact that they're children, they're also unable to make that kind of decision that they wanted to enter a country, so that they are exempted from that kind of responsibility, and they should never be penalized because of their migration status. So what does this mean even for survivors of trafficking? If you're a child, then you cannot threaten a child and tell them that we will report you to the police station because of your illegal entry, because your visa has expired, because you don't have a passport. That can never happen to a migrant child, and even to a survivor of trafficking who is a child. So I want to highlight some of the examples of how unaccompanied or separated children, especially migrant children, are protected in the law. For instance, we have the African Charter on the Rights of the Child that also talks about the best interest of the child, which also, as I have highlighted, is that children should never be penalized because of their migration status or that of their parents, number one. And then the countries have child-specific screening systems, such as in Ethiopia, Djibouti, Kenya, and Zambia, which then children are taken through a screening system, and they are given the appropriate assistance that they require. And then we also have countries that have case management systems run by civil society organizations, and also sometimes the government participates in the case management of migrant children, such as in, I want to highlight a few countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and even Malawi, where the civil society organizations working together with the government are able to assess what are the needs of this child and how can we assist them so as to reduce their vulnerability, and they can receive the assistance that they require. And then we have countries sometimes that have case conferences that take place between the government and NGOs just to review what is the status of this child and how has it been improved. And then now I'll go to my last slide, and as to why immigration detention is really relevant to the issue of protecting survivors of trafficking in persons. Number one, as I had highlighted, is that states are encouraged to not prosecute migrants for their illegal presence or stay. Across the region, we have very many countries that have legislations that do not allow for the detention of survivors of trafficking because of their illegal entry or stay. So you can already see that this is a step in the right direction, where migrants are also looked at. There's the interlink of survivors of trafficking and also migration law, where this principle is taken into consideration and realized. So survivors of trafficking survivors are exempted from criminal penalties, including detentions for reasons relating to the unlawful entry or stay, and the respective anti-trafficking laws at the national level, and also guided by best practice that is provided under regional and international law. Thank you, Evans. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Lillian. That was a powerful presentation. I've seen the chat. People are appreciating your presentations, and I think there's one question for you before I give to John Grace. What can be done to increase the intervention of rescuing migrants in detention, especially Libya specifically. So that was a request for Libya. If I can repeat the question, what can be done to increase the intervention of rescue migrants in detention in Libya specifically? If you can try to answer that, Lilian.
Thank you for
Thank
that
you for that
question.
question.
Okay, great. For rescuing migrants who are put in detention in Libya, Libya is actually a very important country when you're talking about the migration routes to Europe from Africa, and that is why it is experiencing a lot of migrants. So now what countries are doing, especially those that find themselves along migratory routes, unfortunately, is that they are resorting to detention of migrants so as to try and discourage migrants from passing through their country using illegal channels. And this is contrary to what international law provides. So in terms of interventions that can be used to reduce the detention of migrants in those countries, I would say is that even if international law provides for the non-detention of migrants in irregular situations using criminal law, is that at the end of the day, it is not saying that we are not to use lawful means. I just want to make it that very clear. It does not exempt citizens from using lawful means in entering countries. So number one, the awareness creation and sensitization needs to be done for migrants to encourage them to use legal means to enter a country. But in the unfortunate scenario that they are unable to use lawful means to enter a country and they find themselves in irregular situations, such as when they're trying to seek asylum or when they find themselves being exploited and then they are survivors of trafficking, is that then they should be sensitized to know that it is not an offense and they can confidently approach the authorities and they can receive the assistance that they require. Also using the legal aid, I liked the presentation from the previous speaker, using legal aid as an intervention to offer assistance to migrants who are in detention facilities.
Wonderful, excellent. I can see some questions on the chat, but I request Lilian you stay on the chat. Those that you are able to respond directly, you can, and on the Q&A. Thanks so much, Lilian, for that powerful presentation. And let's continue engaging on the chat. I want to invite John Grace from Uganda to share with us the experience of another vulnerable groups, that is the LGBTQ, and of course, sharing some of the insights from Uganda. Over to you, John Grace. And you have about 10 minutes to read this text. Thank you very much, Lilian, for that. Johnny Grace, you're presenting something?
I was presenting for him. For them, I will go ahead and present whenever they come on the call.
Cool. Let me know when they are able to start. They should unmute, open up their mic, and then they start right away.
Okay.
But am I audible?
Yes, proceed. We can hear you.
Okay then. Let me try to screen share my presentation.
Are you able to share your own presentation, John?
It's what I'm trying to see whether I can.
Okay.
Okay. Let us know if you need any assistance.
All right. Is it visible now?
Yes, at least I can see it.
Okay, I think I'll try to. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Grace. I am the coordinator for the Uganda Minority Shelters Consortium. We are a network of Ugandan LGBT+ shelters working collaboratively to provide safe spaces, supportive spaces, and advocacy for LGBT+ victims of violence and homelessness. In terms of our aims, advocacy is one of our aims as an entity. We also do service provision to victims of violence and homelessness seeking shelter. And then lastly, we enhance capacity and sustainability of our very own organizations. I'll try to balance my wording with a few presentations. We recently released a violations report This is our second edition of this particular report. And the first edition of these violations was released. Part of this was released to the World Bank. For those of you that might have heard about the World Bank placing a hold on the funding streams for Uganda. So this was part of the violation report that were presented as evidence to show that the Anti-Homosexuality Act that had been presented was already impacting our very own community. I'll try to stick to the visuals for screen sharing while we present an idea of what was contained in the violations report. So the right to shelter and housing was the highest violations, given the 242 violations of people ending up homeless. The act in itself was essentially, or is essentially, because currently it's still in place, does not allow LGBT plus persons to have some kind of housing or roof over their own heads. This kind of ruling from the current government essentially amplified outing or evicting of LGBT plus persons by landlords. If at all you suspect or you believe your neighbor has never had, for example, an opposite sex person visit them in their premises, you are obliged to report them and then ensure that they do not have any kind of roof over their heads. So these kind of violations were documented from our end, and we had 242 violations in this particular period, using the graphic, as you can see, the right to shelter and housing being the highest, followed by the right to privacy, where privacy in this particular case was also amplified under the Constitutional Court, where LGBT plus persons were compared to being rapists, and somehow they're not allowed any kind of privacy. So that was also a right to privacy violation. The right to work was also one of the effects of this particular act, where people are being essentially chased away from their own employment. Even if you are an LGBT plus person having skill, maybe you're a teacher or a doctor, this somehow becomes a parameter for you to lose your job or to even not be employed as an LGBT plus person. And in this particular report, of course, they're highlighting different challenges faced by LGBT plus individuals in Uganda that limit access to public services and force many into homelessness. So homelessness can be indirect or a direct effect. For example, indirectly, when you lose your job, you're unable to afford rent. And so you end up being placed in a situation or position of homelessness because you are not able to particularly endure the high costs of living associated with being able to access safe housing. In terms of prevalent issues, we have societal hostility, where there was a notable increase in mob violence. That's in the next slide that is being shown, where there's a notable increase in mob violence due to the escalated society towards LGBT plus individuals, where the law more or less showed or enabled perpetrators to take law into their own hands. And we had over 191 freedom from torture violations. As you can see, the perpetrators that are mostly known in this regard include the people within our very own community that take justice into their own hands. Then we also have the landlords that also violate or are hostile towards their own LGBT plus tenants. Then we also have family members, where they're able to even conduct forced annual examinations onto people in their own families who they suspect or perceive or believe to be LGBT plus people. Then the law has also amplified internal injustices in terms of community members, in terms of the law does not support redress mechanisms within, if at all an LGBT plus person, for example, physically hurt or blackmailed or tortured or stole from another LGBT plus person, these two people cannot be presented to the local authorities because their immediate whatever crime that was pre-committed that is not associated with their sexual orientation and gender identity will be thrown aside or put aside, and they'll focus on their sexual orientation and gender identity. So that one also, we noted community members are very own who are known to be part of the perpetrators. There were also unknown individuals where the unknown perpetrators were not able to even trace them. We had near-death experiences, for example, of human rights defenders, where they try to kill some of the LGBT plus human rights defenders and LGBT plus people. And when we try to conduct investigations, these people end up always being unknown, and the crimes are left unattended to. If they're killed, those kind of cases are never concluded. So that's a category of unknown individuals. And as you can see there, the percentages is about between 10 and 15% of unknown perpetrators, which is already problematic. The local council systems were also part of the violators, where they conduct meetings, they out people, they conclude on who should exist in their own community. They can evict you from the very own society. And those were also part of the state actors that we noted as part of the perpetrators. And then lastly, the police itself, which is being noted between 5 to 10% as the perpetrators of these very own injustices against our very own communities. The police itself has been quite instrumental in amplifying these particular injustices, where they end up bribing or insisting on being bribed in order to have LGBT plus persons released if they do not want to go through the rankings of being arrested due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. So in terms of the issues, categorically, we have societal hostility, housing insecurity, where the landlords have significantly contributed to the violations, the family rejection in terms of the major source of abuse stemming from family members due to stigma, rejection, and religion also plays a significant factor in this. And then lastly, the public service access, where it is evident that in terms of accessing employment, in terms of accessing even if it's a health service, you can easily be discriminated against for not identifying as a heterosexual person in the country. And so LGBT plus persons have had challenges from the government in response to this. And when we try to find out the intersectionality regarding the LGBT violence, homelessness, and the trafficking issue in Uganda, we have had limited reporting on this, and yesterday's panel provided context to this, where LGBT plus individuals in Uganda face a heightened risk of violence, homelessness, and trafficking due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. And these issues are obviously interconnected. We have seen a dangerous cycle of vulnerability, and there have been three major factors contributing to this. One, of course, logically, is the discrimination and the violence, where the individuals that often experience societal and familial rejection, increasing their risk of homelessness. When they lack safe housing, they make them more susceptible to violence and exploitation. So people end up seeking for asylum through legal channels and also illegal channels, and that's where the trafficking comes through. The limited support systems, as also has been earlier mentioned, there are few shelters and services that are catering on providing LGBT providing shelter to LGBT plus individuals. So they are forced onto the streets and unsafe situations, and then they end up being trafficked away. And then lastly, of course, in terms of predatory targeting, traffickers tend to exploit the vulnerabilities of homeless LGBT plus individuals, targeting them for forced labor, forced sex work, and domestic servitude. So when you look at the screen, you'll see that in terms of the most common victims of the LGBT plus spectrum, you'll see that gay men are having the highest number of violations in this particular regard, followed by trans women, and then lesbians. As an entity, we have tried to respond to some of them. We've worked with one of our colleagues called Shivana, who responded to one LBQ woman who had been trafficked out. She had been told that they're going to be provided with employment and other, great opportunities in order to access a better job opportunity. But it turned out that they were being forced into forced sex work, and we had to trigger multiple support mechanisms in order to have them deported back to the country, while providing other kind of supports mechanisms. So LGBT individuals that are fleeing violence from Uganda end up being lured by traffickers that normally pose as allies. Someone will try to come to you and pose as an ally or offering a safe haven, instead causing further exploitation, primarily through forced sex work for the LBQ women. The impact of this intersection is also quite evident. It's not much different from what these violations already providing. We've seen increased vulnerability in terms of more violence and homeless trafficking, impacting their physical and mental health for the individuals that are affected. And then there's already limited reporting because of this issue alone of LGBT plus violence and discrimination. Most victims fear to report the crime, which perpetuates the cycle because they worry about being exposed during the reporting process. And then the stigma and marginalization, of course, that comes along with homelessness and sex work for the individuals. In terms of the strategies to address this particular intersection, we are encouraging more shelters to be inclusive and services to be provided for LGBT plus individuals. There will not be trafficking if at all there is a critical support given to homeless individuals within the country. And then we're also trying to engage in anti-trafficking awareness within our very own community, working with allies so that more people are aware about the trafficking risks, providing resources for identification and escape. And then sensitivity training so that the different service providers, the law enforcement, and even the people at the shelter themselves are able to identify the unique needs for LGBT plus individuals in order for them not to end up being more vulnerable than they already are. And then we're also encouraging LGBT plus communities to advocate for their own rights. In this particular case, we are trying to ensure that the law is repealed. Once the law is repealed, then we shall have less instances of people being violated and being forced into positions of dependency. I think that will summarize. We have already shared copies of this particular presentation, but given the time frame, this is what we could put together. Over to you, Evans.
Thank you very much, John Grace, for that presentation. Obviously, it needed more time, but you've really tried under the circumstances. There is one question on the Q&A. Thank you so much, sir, for what can we do or the method to be used in helping the victim? So there is a question on the methods used in helping the victims. If you can try and attempt that, that would be nice. And I can, of course, see some of the questions and comments on the chat. So if you can answer that, John.
Yeah, I was trying to trace the question. I didn't quite hear it well. The multiple messages.
Yes, of course, they are
appreciating
your presentation. They're asking, but what can we do or the method to use in helping the victim? So they're asking simply the methods of helping the victims, especially those who are in LGBTQ in similar circumstances like what you've highlighted in Uganda.
Yeah, in terms of support mechanisms as an entity, that's among the strategies that we've already provided. Of course, some can be from government, and then others can also be from non-state actors. So in terms of government, we are definitely, first of all, requesting the government to monitor and address these particular violations so that they deter more violations from being cumulative, because if there is a coordinated response mechanism where the government is also part of those that are supporting LGBT plus individuals, that is one, first repeal the law. The law has definitely amplified this. Two, we're encouraging more investigations into the reported incidents. As you've seen, there's quite underreporting. We have seen unknown perpetrators, so we're encouraging more investigations into these matters. Most cases are closed once someone finds out this person who was killed or who was almost killed was LGBT, that they just somehow don't get interested in the case because they feel justice has already been given to this particular person simply because of their own sexual orientation and gender identity. In terms of legal remedies, we have tried to work with partners. There are already toll-free lines and hotlines that are being availed for effective legal remedies for victims of violence. So the legal mechanisms can also be looked into so that the ones who are at least courageous enough, most victims do not want to pursue justice for their perpetrators, but at least there are legal remedies in place that are being provided for victims of violence. Then the public statements, condemnation from government officials, that's also something that we have seen more awareness. If we use the example of the daughter of the Cameroon president, when she came out and advocated for our existence and acknowledged that she also is also part of our community, that kind of advocacy is definitely able to counter the narrative that LGBT plus people do not exist, or that we are foreign import, or this is people are being recruited or being converted or paid. So that kind of awareness and advocacy is definitely helpful. But in terms of support mechanisms, definitely we have shelters, one of them. We have mental health support. All these require resourcing. So in a summary, I think would be supporting the CSOs, the civil society organizations that are providing this kind of services to LGBT plus people. We need more funding to be channeled towards them so that they are able to live better lives.
Thank you very much, John, for trying to respond to that question. Of course, we are alive to the fact that most of these issues, just like you said, it's vulnerable groups, but the issues are quite dicey, especially in Uganda. So somebody is suggesting that you can do more dialogue with government, because the government has pronounced itself on issues of LGBTQ and, of course, the political class, and, of course, those societal nomenclatures that have also been pronounced. So thank you so much, John, for the good presentations. There is, of course, a question here, but I think the root causes of human trafficking can be traced to the country of origin. What is this forum doing in addressing those root causes? Of course, if you I'm addressing now to the question. If you look at the presentation, they're also trying to give recommendations and, of course, pointing out on what needs to be done. So stay input until the end of this forum. At least there will be some way forward and, of course, tracking some of these issues. Thank you so much. We have tackled LGBTQ as one of the vulnerable group. And, of course, we've looked at migrants. Now, I want us to move to the refugees. They're also, a group that is more susceptible to trafficking. And the one who is going to talk to us is Rachel Wahome from Kituo cha Sheria, Kenya. Of course, building the case on some of the some of the refugees and some of the issues facing these refugees, especially in the camps, the migration status, and some of the legal challenges that, of course, face them when we talk about migration and refugees. Rachel, if you're ready, please proceed. You have about 8 to 10 minutes for your presentations, and then we conclude. Please take over.
All right. Thank you. Good evening and good morning, and whatever time it is on your end, everyone. My name is Rachel Wahome. I'm an advocate working with Kituo cha Sheria, and I will specifically speak about the vulnerability of refugees and asylum seekers to to slavery, specifically on human trafficking. I really love the conversation that Lilian did on migrants and also the previous presenter from Rwanda on legal aid, because my work and what they have presented is very interlinked. I will go ahead and make my presentation. So within the refugee environment, there's a hidden crisis when it comes to trafficking, because there's always an issue within the law officers and also the human rights organization to differentiate between refugees and victims of trafficking. Also, the victims of trafficking themselves sometimes do not understand the situation in which they are in. So due to that, there's a lack of data on these issues. I've tried to look for data that is well detailed. It seems that there is no much that has been taken keenly on issues to do with refugees and vulnerability to human trafficking. However, this is an issue that is a growing trafficking, and also
Rachel, how much time do you need, please?
Just a minute, please. I'm sorry. Can I get 15 minutes, please?
And then I need to drop off.
Sorry for that.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that. All right, no problem at all. Maybe you can mute from my end. Just
Sorry. Great, cool. Proceed.
okay. All right. Just have some. Okay. So as I was speaking, within the refugee community, it's a very sad syndicate that has been happening, and we've been working with other organizations, specifically the Regal Related Organization, to try and counter the trafficking within this area. I'm trying to move my screen forward. It's not moving also. Here we are. So one of the issues that we've been facing within the refugee community is that the traffickers exploit the victims, as it had been stated earlier, lack of knowledge, lack of documentation, and resources faced by refugees and asylum seekers. Whenever refugees come to Kenya, they do not have documentation, they do not understand the local languages, and they do not know the offices into which. So I'm going to highlight some of the cases that we've been working with, and this is which we have closely worked with the Trans-Organizational Crime Unit in Kenya, a police force, that has been arresting victims of trafficking, and most of them have been detained for even more than a month. So I will give you a case of a young Congolese girl who most of the time they are promised of opportunities in Kenya. And they're promised to be married to another refugees in Kenya, and then they're told they're going to be taken abroad and such issues. And whenever they come to Kenya, they are subjected to labor exploitation, they're subjected to sexual exploitations, and also some of them are subjected to marriages that end up in gender-based violence. Another case is on Ethiopian woman. This is a case where this was not specifically a refugee, but this woman, her case, she was trafficked with a group of people. Then she was hidden in a room with other men where she was sexually abused. Later, there was a word from the neighbor, and then the agency from the Trans-Organized Crime Unit, the people who went to arrest the owner of the person who had arrested that house, and that's how we came in, because one of the victims came to our offices seeking help, and because they did not have documentations as refugees, they stated that they were coming to seek asylum in Kenya, but listening to the circumstances of the case, you could tell that was a human trafficking case, and we were able to involve the Department of Refugees for the assessment on protection, and their processing is still ongoing. The other case that I would like to highlight is on the 3 Ethiopian men. This is the current case that we're having in the office right now. Whenever we are in the reception areas, whenever refugees come in Kenya, we have different reception areas. There are those who come in Moyale, there are those who come in Namanga, there are those who come in different areas depending on which country they are going. In those borderlines, there exist countless number of traffickers who work together with the police officers, work together with officers around there. It's a whole syndicate of traffic thread, where we have a lot of people who take advantage of innocent people. So for these 3 Ethiopian men, the traffickers did, ask for their passport. These ones had come to Kenya with their passport, or at the border, the traffickers asked for their passport. They asked them for a lot of money with the promises that they are going to speed their process in getting documentation, their process in going abroad, and that is resettlement. And due to lack of knowledge, so these men gave all the savings and all the money to this man and their document. And now once they are here in Kenya for 6 months, no document, they haven't gotten any documentation. They have no access to legal services. They have no knowledge of whatever is going. So they started asking for this trafficker on what is happening. And that's when now the trafficker started to threaten them. Is going to, the use of the word report them. He has a lot of power. He can, report them to the police officers. So they are living in fear and they have no way forward. So with these two, we have, as Kituo cha Sheria, we have come forward and we're involving also the Department of Refugee Services and also other agencies that are able to assist these people as the victims of trafficking. So in terms of a legislative gap that I would like to highlight within this space, I will not highlight on the international and the regional legislative, but I'm very glad that Lilian was able to highlight that in great length. I'm going to highlight just what we have in Kenya here. So the Refugee Act in 2021, Section 25(3), which has been repeated in the refugee regulations, the current refugee regulations, it is introducing the holding areas, you can call them the detention areas, as reception centers, which raises further concerns because these settings could be a breeding ground for human trafficking of refugee women and accompanied minors, forced labor, prostitution, and even recruitment by religious cults. And also the Refugee Act 2021, it does not specifically give reference to any victims of human trafficking or any victims in any way, but it highlights just in brief on the protection of the vulnerable groups, but it has not highlighted on how it can be able to prevent and given agencies and create, for example, like we've had in Rwanda, they have a government-based organization where they have a safe house and all that. So the act and the regulations completely against that off. I'm going to speak about the Trafficking in Persons Act, the revised 2023 under Section 18, which fails to adequately reflect the realities of trafficking within the refugee and asylum seekers environment. A section actually gives power to the cabinet secretary to repatriate the victims of refugees. We know how much the victim and the cabinet secretary, the justice center between them is very quite wide. And for a cabinet secretary to give, to give orders to repatriate a victim of refugees is quite, there's a very, very big disconnect on that. And also mentioning the fact that the Trafficking in Persons Act does not have regulations as of the moment. Other thing that I'm going to speak about is on the most of the victims who are mostly Ethiopians, Eritreans, and Sudanese. These are most of the people who have been, we've been able to, mitigate with the, in our legal justice center. The way forward in which we can approach the issue of human trafficking within the refugee space, we can have a collaborative approach. The Department of Refugee Services and also the organizations that work within that space. We can have within the reception centers where we have refugees coming in, we can ensure that we highlight and we educate and we make awareness of the existence and the possibilities of human trafficking. The other one is a technological approach, which we cannot by all means take for granted. We can have an app or a website where a refugee with different languages, Kiswahili, French, because most of the refugees that come in the country speak different languages, or Oromo, wherever they are. If they have access to their mobile phone, they can always, reach out and have a toll-free number where they can always call for help and communicate, and we can able to reach out. We can also move forward by having safe legal routes. And most of the reasons why most of the people are trafficked, specifically can say men and young women, is because of lack of safe legal routes for those who are promised for good jobs. specifically for those who are promised for good jobs in South Africa, where they pass through Kenya, register as refugee, and then they are moved through Uganda and Tanzania with hopes that whenever they are arrested in Uganda, they will be returned to Kenya because they have the refugee registration. So as a way of moving forward, it's good that we have a collaborative approach. They have a technological approach in mitigating human trafficking within the refugee space, and also ensure that we have safe legal routes for everyone within the region. Thank you very much. And back to you, Evans.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your presentation on refugees. There are about 2 questions or thereabout. Gabriel Barasa is asking, and of course, he's from a Safe Jamii Social Justice Center in Kenya, Coastal Region. I'm seeing a lot of people living with disability in the street begging, and most of them are women with children from Tanzania. Which mechanism the government have put in place to protect human trafficking and smuggling in the country? I think that's another topic of disability and of course children, but if you can try and attempt, of course, I'm coming to that in a few. Thank you, Gabriel, for asking that question. Rachel, do you have an answer to that? If you don't, you can pass.
Oh, no problem. I think you can go ahead and answer when you make your presentation. Thank you.
Good. Gabriel, I'll be responding to that quickly after the chat on the presentation that you're doing. You've just done on of course, on refugees, part of the vulnerable groups. So looks like there is no other question for you, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through on the refugees as part of the vulnerable group. Dr. Sell, how many minutes do I have? I want to briefly talk about disability as one of the vulnerable groups, and of course, children.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. I didn't prepare for this because there was somebody who was designated, but due to an unavoidable circumstance, they were unable to make. So one of the other vulnerable groups that exist that are, of course, more susceptible to trafficking, human trafficking, are disability groups and children. I'm going to talk briefly about disability as a component. And for Kenya specifically, and I think Gabriel has raised that on the chat, there are quite a number of disability groups, especially children and women from Tanzania, that are smuggled to Kenya and to the streets for pegging. Some of the factors or some of the gaps that, lead to these groups to be, in this state of, vulnerability. Number one is the stereotypes and of course the stigma created around them from the family. Most of these, especially those who are disabled, from the African culture and settings and belief systems, that these people are just a bad omen, are a curse to the family, and therefore traffickers find it so easy to use them for purposes of exploiting them. Others are used in the streets for pegging. They collect some money, and of course we have seen this in the crips in most of the East African countries. So part of it is the stereotype and the stigma. That's number one. Of course, societal factors. The other thing I think is poverty, because of the nature and the family setup under which they live in, and the cost of taking care of these people. Then that becomes like a push factor for them to be led to the traffickers, who of course tend to exploit them for purposes of maybe organized drug trafficking, smuggling of it, and of course for personal gains in other countries. Others are used especially because of the belief that most of these people can have certain organs. So organ transplants, a part of trafficking and organized crimes, tend to use these disabled groups for that purpose. Because number one, the other thing, of course, that leads to that is lack of awareness and lack of information, and of course literal understanding and social protection systems that are not that strong to protect these people. Because when you have weak social protection systems, that means then their social services are not, rendered effectively, and therefore they become so isolated, they become destitute, they become so vulnerable, and then the traffickers find it easy, to traffic them for those purposes I've talked about. And of course, issues of lack of safe spaces for them, and of course, referral pathways for support.
Evans, you are breaking up. I think you are frozen. Hello?
Because most of them, they don't understand that leads to that. They are trafficked, they are smuggled, and of course, ensuring that we have strong legal. In Kenya, we have the Disability Act. Countries within the region and within Africa needs to look at the law protecting these vulnerable groups. There seems to be a weak link in the legal protection and, of course, the prosecution of these traffickers on the side of disability tends to be low, and therefore punishment is supposed to be enhanced so that it sends a message, what we call in law setting the standards, the jurisprudence on prosecuting cases of this nature will send a strong message. Building and strengthening the advocacy around disability and advocacy on disability mainstreaming, creating procedures, creating guidelines that will provide livelihood programs so that to address issues, what we may call issues around their family systems, issues around poverty, livelihood, and protection services. And of course, that will also enable the protection, social protection systems to be able to look at these people and raise awareness to reduce stigma and stereotypes around these people, some of the factors that leads to trafficking of people who are disabled. I think I will stop there for the interest of time. For children, I think children are of course under the same category of the vulnerable groups. Children and trafficking, because children most of the time they don't have that understanding on their rights, and of course the understanding on the trafficking itself. They don't have power to say no, and the process, especially for children. And of course, some of the factors that lead children to be trafficked, of course, just like disabilities, poverty is one of the push factors. And you also find that neglect, parents are not taking time to provide for the needs of children. Therefore, somebody else that takes that, what you may call lack of parental responsibility. And from the side of government, lack of preventive services, and of course, ensuring that their livelihood or to the urban areas, that they are provided with all those adequate protective services, leads those children to be more open for traffickers, of course, to take advantage of them, to exploit them. Most children are, of course, boys and girls, can be trafficked for, organ transplant, sex trafficking, labor, labor trafficking, and they can be exploited on that aspect. Of course, again, some of case on what you call, they can be used for issues of slavery, on war. They can be used as army, the young army in most countries. So I think I will stop there for purposes of time. Those are some of the vulnerable groups that are subjected, and of course we are looking at how can we strengthen the legal, the social systems, the protective systems around disability, around LGBTQ, and of course looking at the refugees and migrants. Some of the pointers that have been ably been put forward by the panelists, I think, If we had time, we could look into some of the recommendations. Of course, the panelists have tried to put through some of the recommendations. In case you have any questions to those issues, to those vulnerable groups, especially on issues touching around the vulnerable groups and trafficking, you can, of course, put that on the chat. We can be able to respond. Thank you so much for listening to us, and back to you, Dr. Excel.
Thank you, Evans. I'll hand over to
You're muted.
Davina.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. So that was great. We are close to on time, so we're going to move right into our partnerships case study presentation on leveraging partnerships for effective legislation and enforcement in the region. For that, we have two speakers, Claire Bolton from the Center on Human Trafficking Research and Outreach based in the United States. She's the assistant director and she's run programs in Senegal, Sierra Leone, Zambia, and Malawi. She facilitates data collection activities, including a child trafficking household survey, which is the largest household survey to be conducted in Sierra Leone. And as someone with expertise in survey methodology and research, I know how incredibly complicated that is. So I'm looking forward to her remarks. And she's been focusing on program and grants management and research for over 8 years before this role with a doctorate in geography. Our next speaker is going to be from the Center on Human Trafficking Research and Outreach in Sierra Leone. And she is going to be using her experiences focusing on a background. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Umaru. Yes, correct. Thank you, Giselle. Umaru is going to be focusing on his background in the UNDP and many other initiatives, including the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. He's worked as the project delivery coordinator for the British Council and has led modern slavery initiatives there. And he's won many awards in our field. So over to you guys.
Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm about to share my screen to share the presentation. Great, thank you. So I'm Claire Bolton. I'm joined today by my colleague, Mr. Umar Fofana from Sierra Leone, joining us in Freetown today, and I'm in Athens, Georgia, at the University of Georgia. We are speaking on leveraging partnerships around effective legislation and enforcement, focusing more on the enforcement piece today, or rather the implementation of legislation. We wanted to focus on our partnership with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC, and our Sierra Leone project. So I'm going to give a bit of overview of the project more broadly, and then we'll speak a bit more about the strategy and kind of specific insights that we have gained from this project. So just a bit of background, we are the Center on Human Trafficking Research and Outreach at the University of Georgia in the United States. We are a collaborative, international, cross-disciplinary research hub in the global effort to combat human trafficking. We conduct research, develop programming, and influence policies to drastically and measurably reduce human trafficking and other forms of exploitation. We conduct baseline and endline research, or that's what we've done in Sierra Leone, and then we are using results of the research to develop evidence-based programming and also influence policy in a way that is evidence-informed. Broadly speaking, our programs are in right now in West and Southern Africa. You may also know Centro from the Prevalence Reduction Innovation Forum, which took place in multiple countries around the world, including countries in North Africa and also Tanzania. Our work, it's community engaged implementation research. So again, implementation projects that are very much grounded in research to reduce child trafficking, sex trafficking, trafficking of youth and young adults. Those are some of our focal areas. We co-design our policy and program interventions with local partners. we're very much focused on MEL to strengthen the link between research and programs as well. But we hear the buzzword of sustainability a lot of the time, but we feel very strongly about the power of long-term sustainability and continuity around different trafficking sectors that we work in. So even as we finish certain projects, we're very much invested, and we do a lot of sustainability planning and mapping to make sure that our efforts will really last in the long term, because as we know, that is often the challenge of many projects done in this sector, in the sort of like the development world as well. So this presentation today speaks a bit to what we did we think will lead to more impactful, long-lasting sustainability from our project. I'll share just a bit about our Sierra Leone program, and then Mr. Fofana will come in to speak a bit more about the specific partnership. Mr. Fofana has been with us since 2020 and is an incredibly talented and experienced leader who is always sort of going beyond the kind of just the basic activities of a program. So he's going to share a little bit from his strategic mind of what we did, again, to try to ensure greater sustainability, leading to enforcement of the Anti-Trafficking Act in Sierra Leone. A program overview, the objective of our program in Sierra Leone, which started in 2018, I can't believe it was that long ago, is to measure and reduce child trafficking prevalence in 4 districts of Sierra Leone: Kono, Cambia, Kenema, and Kailaun, in the eastern part of the country, the eastern province, and then also the northwest, sharing a border with Guinea. Our research found high rates of prevalence rates of child trafficking, which are listed here, with the highest rate being 46% in Kono, the sort of the famous diamond mining district of Sierra Leone. There's a lot more we could say about the research and the program and all of it, but we are trying to just narrow in and focus on the benefits of one of our sub-projects. But just a broad overview, for our research, we partnered with a local agency called Conflict Management Development Associates, conducted the largest household survey of any kind that has taken place in Sierra Leone in recent years. And then following the research, we put in place programming with actually 4 organizations. This is a very sprawling, large project, and we are just focusing on UNODC today. So we also partnered with World Hope International, an international NGO, Antibert Consultancy, a local political consultancy that has been supporting us in public advocacy around anti-trafficking, another fascinating project. And also the Journalism Center on Global Trafficking, which the idea of this project is to broadcast trafficking more clearly in media and to fund actually investigative journalism, which we rarely see even in kind of more wealthy, more in the Western world. We rarely see quality investigative journalism into trafficking. This project allowed this to take place in Sierra Leone. Just to share a bit of our very promising results, we recently conducted end-line research into the prevalence of child trafficking to determine if there had been any change since we started the project. We did find a decrease in child trafficking across all 4 districts, most notably in Kono, the kind of diamond mining area, where we noted a 30% decrease in child trafficking. We did also find some fascinating and challenging results that in some districts, child labor actually increased while child trafficking decreased. As we are working on our end-line reports, we are trying to understand why that's the case and how our program may have contributed to the decrease in child trafficking in these districts. I'll share just a bit about our program with the UNODC, and then I will pass over to my colleague who can speak a bit more about the real strategy behind this project. So we partnered, one of our projects was to partner with the UNODC on a project to develop a training manual and to conduct trainings on trafficking in persons to be incorporated into to be used with Sierra Leone's law enforcement and also judiciary actors, so judges and magistrates. The goal of the project was to build the capacity of criminal justice practitioners to identify, to investigate, and to prosecute cases of child trafficking and convict traffickers, finding in our research that knowledge and capacity around child trafficking in particular was very challenged in the criminal justice system. Through this project, we're also very proud to have contributed to the creation of a UNODC office in Freetown. Great. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague to present the next slide. Over to you, Umaru.
Thank you so much, Claire. Hello, everyone, panelists and participants. So I am going to speak about the processes more or less leading to what we've just done. I mean, all the good things that Claire has shared with you. So our program with UNODC actually started in earnest about a year ago, but we have achieved quite a lot. And I think I'd just like to take you through some of the processes. So we started this program with a needs assessment to understand the needs of criminal justice actors. So we conducted needs assessment in all 4 districts that 4 project hotspots that Claire mentioned across Kenema, Kailam, Cambia, and Kailam. And part of our findings was that there is need for capacity strengthening among criminal justice actors, but also there was a need for specialized materials on trafficking in persons. So we used that findings to develop a tailor-made intervention model, and which led to the establishment of this very important project. So we have over the time worked on ways to build on the capacity of law enforcement practitioners, state prosecutors, and judicial actors. And what we have done also is to make sure that during these processes, we try to make sure we integrate their ideas as best as possible. And so we've done that through meaningful engagement with the leadership of the judiciary, the leadership of the Sierra Leone police, and the leadership of the state prosecutors, because we think that it is very much important to get them involved at the initial stage of the process, which could enhance ownership and also strengthening sustainability of the project. So like Claire mentioned, this program is to strengthen the capacity of criminal justice actors. And we've recently developed a training manual, which I will take you shortly about the processes that we went through to develop that manual. And we have now proud of a cohort of master trainers that we have trained on this program that will lead on to cascade the training to their peers in the future. Next slide. Thank you, Claire. So we have worked with the government of Sierra Leone to enact a very important legislation in 2022. Before now, we had the 2005 Anti-Trafficking Act, which was not survivor friendly. So we leverage on our partnership to have a more effective legislation that will speak to the issues of human trafficking, especially child trafficking. So we work with the government of Sierra Leone, to conduct sessions so that we could source information from practitioners, consultation programs, to make sure that we understand what were the challenges in implementing the 2005 Anti-Trafficking Act. And in fact, why the act was not effective as it should be. So that came about the new act, the 2022 Anti-Trafficking Act, which makes provision for the establishment of a victim trust fund. So recently, the government of Sierra Leone, in partnership with Central and other actors in the counter-trafficking ecosystem, have established a victim trust fund, which is actually meant to support survivors of trafficking and to also address issues around restitution for survivors of trafficking, because that has been a huge problem in Sierra Leone, where survivors' needs are unaddressed. So the new act actually speaks to specific issues in addressing survivors' needs. So our program with UNODC is very much timely because it looks at effective ways to make sure that the new act is enforced. And how can that be done? One is to make sure that we raise a lot of awareness about the new act, and which we've done. We have recently developed a user-friendly version of the act. So we looked at the provision from the act because, I mean, we all know that sometimes the languages used in these documents could not be understood by, our people. So we thought that it is important that we break the languages down. We have a user-friendly version so that, everyone that reads it understand what the act says and also relate to the provisions. So we've done that, and we've also conducted training in enhancing knowledge around issues of the new act. And so this program with UNODC is actually supporting criminal justice actors to enforce the act. And we've made sure that all the documents, including the recently developed training manual we've made, actually speaks to the provisions in the training manual, because in the act, and the act actually informs what, for example, what the law says and on issues of trafficking, on issues of recruitment, and also investigation, prosecution, and conviction issues. Next slide, Claire. All right, so we have achieved key goals through this program, and one of the goals, like I mentioned, is to develop a training manual, which went through a series of consultations with lived experience individuals, survivors of trafficking, community leaders, criminal justice actors, to make sure that the manual reflects their perspective, but also to give the manual the credence that it deserves, so that it could be used by this set of by the beneficiary institutions. So we have a manual that we've created that we believe has a lasting impact and can be used across the criminal justice actors in Sierra Leone. And we did that through a very strong sense of ownership, because we got the leadership of the criminal justice institutions to be involved in the creation of the document, sourcing feedback, but also in ways to further engage. For example, whenever we have consultation workshop, we sit with the leadership of, for example, the Chief Justice of Sierra Leone to agree on dates, to agree on what should be covered at the session, to agree on ways to source feedback from members of the judiciary. And we do that across the board. We also meet with the Sierra Leone Police and the Ministry of Justice to make sure that they are very much involved at the planning process, because that is actually where ownership starts. And once they own the process, then they will actively support its development and, of course, streamlining it into their institutions. So we made sure that the manual reflects the voice of survivors, and especially how their needs could be addressed, because there are a lot of issues around survivors' needs being unaddressed, and we very much acknowledge the fact that more needs to be done, and we've tried as best as possible to make sure that this manual is survivor-centered and also reflects the local context in Sierra Leone. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, so like I mentioned earlier, through the needs assessment, we were able to identify certain knowledge gaps among investigators, prosecutors, and convictors. And this is widely very much important for us to look at, because if these needs are not addressed, it will be difficult for us to have speedy trial of trafficking cases, which has always been the problem. So what we did was, how can we have these institutions together to discuss what needs to be covered, or what we need to pay attention when it comes to empowering them to address issues around investigation, prosecution, and conviction. But I think more or less we tried to see how we could get them in one room to discuss the challenges, because most often a prosecutor may say the investigator did not provide the required evidences. So how do we make sure the investigator understands the expectation, or what is expected of them? And so we created that platform where investigators, prosecutors, and of course the judges who convict cases actually sit to discuss what is required to be able to provide to be able to prosecute and convict trafficking cases. And I think that was a very good model, because it has helped us develop an important tool that we believe will speak to some of these issues, and will provide speedy investigation of trafficking cases, but also effective prosecution as well. And so one thing that we also noticed, of course, that we try to do is to make sure that the manual actually, it's very much user-friendly. So we have we did not only develop the training manual, but we also have a user-friendly version of the manual. So the training manual could be used, for example, will be streamlined in the institutions, in the judiciary institution and law enforcement. But the user-friendly version of the manual, which could be called a handbook, can be used at police stations, for example, so that law enforcement officers can reference the handbook maybe when investigating cases. And of course, that could be able to inform them to make valid decision as they proceed in investigating human trafficking cases. And one thing that I've actually speak out about this project, as Claire mentioned, is that we've worked with UNODC to have a local presence in Sierra Leone, because we believe that that is very critical for sustainability, and it has also enhanced local expertise in issues of human trafficking. And the National Project Officer have worked with me very closely. We work on a daily basis, because our approach at Centro is actually to be very much hands-on with our implementing partners. So we've worked very closely with them to set up meetings with so set up meetings with the judiciary, law enforcement, and other criminal justice actors to make sure that we're able to plan these events with them accordingly. Next slide, please. All right, so like I said, we were very much concerned about how can we make sure this project is owned by by our target population, the beneficiaries, but also, at the bigger picture, how the government of Sierra Leone will take this project forward when the program ends. So these have actually led to we set up strategic meetings with influencers like the directors that are very critical in these institutions. We set up meetings with the Chief Justice, with the IG, to advocate and to, of course, bolster their support to make sure that they are able to use the training manual, to use the resources that we are providing, to streamline it into the institutions, so that when this program ends, they can take it forward and they could train both in-service officers, but also new recruits in the future. And we have, which have actually led to, a very good system that we see that is very promising. And I think I will just speak to this, that recently when the training manual was developed, we had our first implementation workshop. And that first implementation workshop is part of rolling out of the training manual. Interestingly, the judiciary of Sierra Leone and law enforcement institution, the Sierra Leone Police, and the Ministry of Justice actually led, in the rolling out of that training. They developed the agenda. They led the facilitation of the training. And I think that actually led to a very good ownership of the process. So we are very much confident that that was a very good beginning. And we believe that this could, continue to progress, and more officers will be trained, more judges will be trained to make sure that they understand the issues or the nuances of human trafficking and how to investigate and prosecute cases. And we have, now we are in the process of advocating, like I mentioned earlier, to make sure we streamline the manual as best as possible. And we're also in discussion with the judiciary to see if we could set up small groups of judges that will lead this process forward, to see how they could engage their peers, conduct more trainings, but also have some mentorship program across judicial actors. And also that is something that we also want to replicate around amongst law enforcement and the state prosecutors. Next slide, please. All right, so like I mentioned, when I started, I spoke about how we've been very much hands-on in this process. And one way that we have done that is to make sure that we support UNODC technically to review the training manual, to make sure that it actually aligns with the needs of the criminal justice system, but also for it to reflect real experiences that have been shared by survivors or victims of trafficking. So we have, over time, when we are in the process of developing the manual, we did extensive review of the manual, and we also sourced feedback from the judiciary and the Sierra Leone Police, and as well as the Ministry of Justice, so that they could review and provide further feedback, to make sure that the manual is very much enriched to serve their purpose. And we have also spoken about how can we make sure that the criminal justice is very much effective. So now we are in consultation with the judiciary, to discuss strategies and strengthen the judiciary, but also to look at what other resources could be needed to address these issues. So, issues around resources, but also how we could work with them to develop, for example, an implementation plan, but also to look at future opportunities in ways to work with the judiciary. And like I mentioned, the training manual, when at its development stage, we will try to have very good involvement, very inclusive process, to have local authorities involved, the paramount chiefs, survivors of trafficking, social workers, law enforcement officers, to make sure that the manual reflects their perspective, because we know that they are the end users. So it is very much relevant for them to speak to the issues and make sure the manual speaks to the local context. Next slide, please. All right, so what next? Like I mentioned, this program actually ended in June, and but we are very much committed as an organization, and so we will stay until, it is promised that we'll stay until at least September of 2025. And what we want to do, for the remaining period that we have, we want to make sure that there is continuity of this project. We want to make sure that what we have done over the years is sustainable and can be taken forward by the government of Sierra Leone. So now we are in the process of developing an implementation framework of the training manuals to make sure that it is institutionalized in the judicial system. And how do we intend to do that is to have close meetings with the leadership of these institutions to look at their training calendars of events, and then to see how we can make sure that this manual is incorporated into the upcoming training. And this is something that we are doing in consultation with the Ministry of Social Welfare, which is the government angle that is responsible to monitor and also oversee human trafficking issues in Sierra Leone. Because we believe that if they are part of the process, they could easily monitor it even if we are not around, and which we believe could be a very good sustainability model. And we are also discussing ways to have, like I mentioned, smaller groups that would speak to these issues, but also move the agenda forward, advocate around learning programs, extensive learning programs for criminal justice actors, people like the judges, like state prosecutors, the police, to make sure that whatever knowledge gap that exists is actually overcome through these trainings. So this is something that we are doing, and we are also in the process of scoping future project opportunities to see how we could have widespread training across the criminal justice system. And that is something that we intend to do in the coming weeks. We have spoken with the Chief Justice, the Minister of Justice, and the Inspector General of Police. They are very much recipients of this project, and they are very much on board on ways we could work together to build on what we've done, but also to see how they could provide more training, do a widespread training of the program, but also mainstream the training manual into the criminal justice system, because we think that that is the only sustainable approach that will support what we've done over the years. And that is the only thing that we could do that could address speedy trial of cases, but as well effective investigation and prosecution of trafficking cases. Okay, next slide. So I think I'll stop here for now and see if there are any questions. My colleague and I will be ready to answer to those questions. Thank you. Yes, so I see.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Do you see there's a question in the Q&A. Someone says, Paulinus said, can you share your training manual with us? They are Nactal in Nigeria. He said Nactal in Nigeria is also training law enforcement here in Nigeria, and they would like to connect with you all. Is the training manual available for sharing?
Yes, it is available, and I've just noted the email. We'll make sure we share it with them, because definitely we want this to be a tool that could inspire the development of other tools across the region. So very much a welcome idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions for this team? And we want to say a great thank you to Claire and Umaru. I know Claire has to jump off, but any questions for this team before they have to leave? We have some other people sharing their email addresses to also receive the manual. Please feel free to also drop your questions in the chat. We have a couple minutes if anyone is interested in asking a question to Umaru. We're getting lots of email addresses wanting to partake in the training manual. So thank you all. Yes, you can send your information. We will save this and share it with Umar and Claire so that they can share that with you. But if we have no other questions, I'd like to say thank you to the team at Centro, who are always great partners and supporters of the Freedom from Slavery Forum. Thank you so much, Umaru and Claire, for your fantastic presentation today. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Belfour, for a great conclusion to that Q&A. And yes, thank you for that presentation. We're actually doing great on time, and we're going to move right into Dr. Brooke Bellow's session. So Dr. Bellow is a great friend. She's the leader of the More to Life movement. Really, it's not just a foundation. She's incredible. She has a PhD in pastoral clinical counseling. She's an incredible creative. We are so lucky to be able to have her working with us on crafting a movement-wide narrative. And so with no further ado, Brooke, over to you.
I don't believe that we have Dr. Bellow on just yet, so we will give her a couple minutes. She's just messaging me that she is getting online. So in the meantime, we can probably maybe circle back to some questions that we have, just in case, just as we make up some time.
We can also give some context. We can also give some context from the other regions and what's been going on with the movement narrative, if that's helpful. But it's yeah. Also, as a little intro to Dr. Bellow's presentation, we've been undertaking this initiative in all of the regional forums so far, and really it's very interesting because in each of the regions, our expert leaders that, just like you, come together to try to talk to us about what's most important that they want to be represented in a movement narrative. Really, it's come to really reflect some of the regional flavor of the issues. So, for example, in the Caribbean, we're seeing a huge focus on climate change and the impacts of rising sea levels and what that'll mean for anti-slavery efforts and vulnerable populations. We're seeing in the Americas, there's a really big focus on financial crimes and AI and how technology and the internet can really be affecting here. We are so interested to hear from our colleagues in Africa as the Africa Regional Forum to kind of tell us more about some of the ways that we feel that slavery, the anti-slavery movement has evolved and changed and what the current pulse of those needs are. We're hoping that this document kind of represents all of us, like this moment in the field, what funders need to prioritize. We were recently in Brussels for the European Regional Forum, and there was a lot of focus on the recently passed legislation focusing on supply chain transparency and the idea that we have an obligation now to implement some of this world-leading legislation preventing modern slavery in supply chains. So it really varies by region in terms of what will come up. But as we're waiting for Dr. Bellow to join us, it might be helpful if you start thinking of like the 2 to 3 really important trends that you think are unique to the Africa region that you think a narrative really wouldn't be complete without representing. Brian, Brian, Giselle, have we missed anything? I think those were pretty standard. There's a lot of issues with also balancing in the Caribbean came up the issue of balancing corruption with capacity. So do like low income countries with lower GDPs, are they actually, is it corruption? Is that a major issue, or is it more that there just aren't enough resources to help all the vulnerable people that anti-trafficking efforts kind of get deprioritized as a matter of course? I can't think of any other major summary trends. Can anyone else, does anyone else have anything to contribute from the Free the Slaves team?
Thank you, Davina. I can jump in. Just until Dr. Bellow is able to join us. I think maybe I can give just a little bit of an introduction to the narrative. There's a long introduction to the proposed narrative in the document, but I know probably a lot of you are quite busy and haven't had a chance to read it all. It's actually quite lengthy documents, about 10 pages. So what I'll try and do here until Brooke is able to join us is to just provide a bit of a background on this process and kind of the purpose of it, And then Brooke can, when she's able to join us, can facilitate the discussion and feedback on the narrative document and kind of bring in your perspectives and opinions that we value so much. So just over a year ago, our executive director, Bukeni Waruzi, shared his vision for developing an updated, unified narrative for the anti-trafficking movement with the Freedom from Slavery Forum's team at Free the Slaves. So shortly after that, we launched the process of co-creating this movement narrative through the Freedom from Slavery Forum series. In December of last year, Dr. Bello joined the process to help facilitate its development, to lend her leadership, her influence, and to ensure that all stakeholders across the movement are able to provide feedback on this document and just the general idea that we're trying to accomplish here. So as I said, that this process is integrated into the 2024-2025 Freedom from Slavery Forum series. So this year, there's a total of 7 regional forums. The Africa Forum is the 5th in the series. We still have the Asia Forum and the MENA Regional Forum yet to happen this year. And we're reserving a part of each forum for this conversation to have a discussion about what a new narrative, a new unified narrative for the movement will look like. Okay, I've just been told that Brooke is here, so I'm going to pass over to her. Welcome, Brooke.
Hi.
So glad you can join us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow, what technical challenges in the world that we have all over the world. Thank you so much, Brian. Davina, it was good to see you. Good morning, everyone in Africa and other parts of the world where you may be joining in from. I'm so glad to be with you. Let me know before I go to sort of an intro that you all did receive a copy of the draft narrative. Just by putting like a thumbs up in your Zoom or something like that, you all received the draft and had an opportunity to read it. Okay, I didn't receive it, not yet. I am going to share my screen and go through part of it and kind of talk about the why. Right now, let me know that if you can all see the introduction to the draft.
Yes.
Okay, okay, wonderful. And let me go ahead and make it a little bit bigger for anyone who might need that to make it easier. And so the introduction really does explain. So I really want to kind of go through that, but I want to, you know, in the forums that Free the Slaves, the freedom forums that we've had so far this year, and starting last year when this all began, it's been really exciting. And what I want you all to know and understand is that it's really important that it's all forms of human trafficking, modern day slavery, and all voices. Absolutely essential. But there is no way with such an intense and extraordinary complex issue that every voice will see their voice in the detailed way that they would like to. And so as we go through the process completing this year, it's important that your voice is heard, that we don't miss any forms, and that this draft with collective voices around the world is meant to be a bullhorn. It's meant to be a foundational aspect that many things can grow out of, and road mapping and other documents could come out of this. And so that's what makes it exciting. One of the things in some of the first forums this year that there were challenges with, obviously, were some of the terminologies, which really differs from region to region sometimes in the US, and surely from nation to nation. And then within those nations, sometimes there are different idioms and colloquialisms and ways of expressing an issue. And this is a very passionate issue. And so the idea is that collaboratively, you are helping us. Africa is very important. And just so you know, sidebar, 40% of all my DNA, about 43%, comes from not just one country in Africa, but like 15. Like I'm all over Africa. So I can't wait to go there. I've never been, but my family has, and I will be there next year. And so the introduction of this, let me just read it. So many of you said you had. Despite being one of the oldest issues in human history and affecting more than 50 million people, modern forms of slavery receive limited global attention. And that's one of the reasons why we need to galvanize just the groundswell from civil society, systemic systems, in addition to leaders in the space and government bodies all over the world. This is important in this hour. In addition to the lack of public concern, many governments and groups worldwide are not effectively acknowledging that modern slavery actually exists. And as you know, there are laws in different regions and different nations that may inhibit the ability to absolutely provide services, to identify, and to even consider it a crime. And so that's why this document is really important. And I will say that this draft that Brian and I have smoothed out has the voices of over 100 different individuals and various nations, and even a little bit more than that. And so there are other people that have put words and sentences, and we want to explain how that works. And we just take it and kind of draft it out and make sense of what everyone is saying. So attention to recognition are often limited due to social misrepresentations, oversimplification of vulnerability issues, the stigmatization of people with lived experience, and public resistance stemming from the historical legacy of slavery. And that foundational aspect is that a lot wasn't done during chattel slavery and post that, or even pre, at the weight that it could be done or understood. And so modern slavery has some of the same challenges that we want to really sort of solve. And so while other global issues have gained significant traction in creating public will, partly due to their direct impact on humans, something they can see every day, the fears they raise and advocacy efforts to increase global concerns, we have yet to see that similar trend in modern slavery. And so moving on a little bit, the aspect and document here based on Buchanan Free the Slaves and their sort of really wonderful archetype of understanding climate change. And so the climate change template, which is something that the world over understands, was and is the template that we've used to kind of identify how does someone take a global issue and create this archetype of a document that is able to be dispensed throughout the world when everyone can take a piece and understand, and no one is bickering about that document. They receive it as such, and that's the deal. We know that this document hasn't been changed in just about 25 years. So it is time for an update, but it must be the right update. And it's important that it is just a foundation. It's not meant to solve it all, but it's a foundational structured document that helps. So framing a new narrative for the movement, the 2024 to 2025 Freedom Slavery Reform Series is an opportunity for regional and global stakeholders to be able to do that. We talk about the background, though it was never formalized into a document or officially adopted across the various sectors of the movement. There was one done that emerged in the early 2000s. And its focus primarily was sex trafficking, right? Which in and of itself is a form of labor trafficking, depending on what part of the world you live in, or forced labor, depending on where you live. And so that is why, one of the other reasons why the current narrative I'm reading here, often trend towards single, emotionally salient aspects of the issue. And so that's why we want to add other layers and complex challenges, because the world has changed in 25 years. Don't you guys agree? Like completely. In addition to the fact that post-pandemic, it's really changed. So the case study, it kind of already talked about that as it relates to climate change. And so developing a new narrative, let's talk about developing a new narrative just a little bit. Just over a year ago, Free the Slave's Executive Director Bukini Warusi shared his vision for developing an updated, unified narrative for the anti or county trafficking movement. And that's really where this stems from. This narrative development process integrated into the series, the Freedom Forums, throughout different regions in the world. And the purpose, jumping to that, because you all, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe everyone received the document last night, right? Aline and Brian and Giselle. So you all have this and are able to go through it.
Yes, it was sent out twice through our newsletter list. I also just put the link to the download in the chat. It's just a little bit if you scroll up from the bottom there, and you can download both an English or a French version, whichever is best for you, or both.
Okay, great. And how much more time do I have?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, merci. I believe this is being translated to you all in French, right? So
yes,
give me a thumbs up if you are leaning in and understand and are tracking with me so far. Just give a thumbs up or put something in the chat. Just this collaborative aspect to let me know that you're listening. I'm going to go to the chat right now. Okay, wonderful. I just want to put, Lucia writes, the presentations are well organized now, that we are planning to have a World Day to mark the Day Against Trafficking in Persons. This comes hand in hand, very insightful, even as different organizations plan for the day. Thank you for organizing the webinar. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Can't wait to hear more about the advancement in AI. Wonderful. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Thumbs up. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so you guys pretty much, we all understand the purpose of the narrative. Let's get into a little bit of the proposed narrative, and just want to read through a couple of aspects and talk about how through the link that you have in Google Docs, you'll be able to comment and make suggestions, loves, likes, definitely don't like. The most important aspect is that this redraft is like the fourth kind of draft throughout this year. And so there has been a lot of input already and a lot of changes and authorizations and shifts so that it really begins to include all forms, all voices. And so your part is to be able to do that. I'm actually doing a teaching for the African Survivor Network on the 31st, and I'll be sharing it with some of them as well. I'm doing the keynote, so I'm really excited about that. So the crime, the problem, the overarching proposed narrative, modern slavery is a systemic global crisis that deprives at least 50 million, at least, meaning could be 60, could be 80. It's really an unknowable number exactly, but we know it's at least 50 million, right? Stealing freedom, dignity, and dreams. It thrives in obscurity, preying and exploiting the most vulnerable. We must unite our efforts to protect those at risk, hold traffickers accountable, and care for survivors. All forms of survivors, labor trafficking, child labor, sex trafficking, domestic servitude, all forms, all voices, by addressing both immediate needs and future threats, prevention, right? We can work towards a world where slavery cannot exist. And that's the point of the document. Not that it doesn't exist, but because of the way that we help systematic issues, that it cannot exist. It has a difficult time of thriving. The crime, the problem. So modern slavery, trafficking in persons, and human trafficking are category level terms often used interchangeably to describe a crime in which one person exploits and profits from another. And that's the point. So we don't want to wonk and drill down on, we don't like the term modern slavery. We don't like the term trafficking in persons. We don't like the term human trafficking. It's important to collectively use these interchangeably because we all have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some of us really don't like the term modern slavery based on the issues of chattel slavery and the slavery of Black people from Africa throughout the world and the diaspora now. Some just don't like that term. However, it is a term that, a term that people really understand is very personal and emotional. And so it would behoove us to consider utilizing modern slavery, trafficking in persons, and human trafficking so that we're touching on sort of the impacting the thoughts and the ideology and the understanding that resonates with everyone. That's very important. So consider that as we move forward. Modern slavery is devastating reality. It violates a person's human rights, and so on. When we go through to this, in 2001, we believe that it was 700,000 to 800,000. In 2023, the Global Index reported that it's 50 million. Additionally, these numbers do not include the 160 million estimated to be exploited through child labor practices in 2020. And despite the staggering number of people estimated to be affected, the 2022 UNGLO TIP report estimated that only 53,800 victims of human trafficking were identified globally in 2020. Is that not the most insane number in the world? And so the reason this document exists is to really give just a revelation so that people are like, oh my gosh, this is a problem. And it just like, I want to say climate change and other challenges, it hits me here at home. Its effect is right in my community. It said, furthermore, it is estimated that only 5,600 traffickers were convicted of crimes in 2022. The current lack of public and political will dramatically limits the availability of funding and effectiveness of the response. One of the least funded areas in social service globally is the area of human trafficking. And so the funding issue is a massive issue. And what you need to fund the issue in Africa is different in the US, different in London, different in Belgium, Eastern Europe, in different parts of China, where there are issues, in Singapore, where I was, or in the Philippines, because economically, the way that our global currency works, it varies. And when I heard of some of the funding needed in Africa and the amount that it would take, and that they didn't have that, I was in tears, because it's about 30% of what it costs in the States. And so we should be able to easily fund initiatives in Africa. And so it's important that any data and understanding around those issues affecting Africa, those are key indicators of the challenge. And what I would encourage you to really add items and to edit and to comment based on fact, not emotion, not necessarily personal opinion, but fact, data, and the understanding of what is happening on the great continent of Africa. If we go down a little bit, historically, vulnerability to modern slavery has been most prominent in marginalized and underserved communities. However, the proliferation of digital technology, including AI, is increasing the risk for educated professionals, as these tools can be exploited for forced criminality, operations, and surveillance. This is absolutely key of your understanding and your comments in this area. I'll be doing a keynote at the Nkosi conference, the CISA, in August, coming up in a week or week and a half. And it's all about the language of data and artificial intelligence and how to attack criminals and to provide service provision with the utilization of new technology. The last part of the document, we get into the bulk of the narrative, is the call to action, right? And the call to action can be expanded slightly with particular bullets, but as it is now in this draft, this is how it is. The increasing frequency of catastrophic events such as climate change, economic instability, and I would say war and conflict would be added to that, and technological misuse are heightening vulnerability worldwide and continually increasing opportunities for exploitation. Delaying action allows more people to be enslaved and exploited. It also makes more vulnerable or prolonging the suffering of those who have lost or never had their freedom and dignity. We must fight against all forms of exploitation and include all voices in developing solutions. We cannot allow the exponential expansion of enslavement and exploitation of human beings to continue unchecked. As a global community, we have already surpassed our ability to pay the cost of these horrific crimes on people, communities, and economies. We must act now and commit to collaborative whole of society approach. This approach should address systemic emerging vulnerabilities, suppress and prosecute traffickers and exploiters. And this is really key, that based on the criminal system and the criminal justice system in Africa, what are your comments and ideas about the criminality and the issues around prosecution, prosecutions in Africa? A little bit tongue twisted today, but in Africa, they're so important. And then it says, and provide trauma-informed care and recovery support to survivors, ensuring everyone can be free and have the opportunity to thrive. And so I think when it comes to the call to action, there will be added bullets that form a well-rounded pounce on key, not just a overview of calls to actions, but just a few ideas, because there are many, but we can add a couple of bullets that I think will, based on what we're hearing from everyone, that'll really hit hard. The way forward, a more unified movement, part of the document, read through that, go through that, and it gives a couple of highlighted bullets that we have at the very top. Despite the gravity of the situation and long-term suffering of millions of people, there is a reason for hope. The total number of people currently affected globally still presents a small fraction of the population. And I want to add that some people might consider, without thinking, that there's redundancy. But before you get to the narrative piece, you see the reasons why, and then you get to the narrative. So it's not redundancy, because what you see before the new narrative is all the reasons why, is the foundation of the narrative. And so some things have a repetitive understanding, so it's actually not redundant. Keep that in mind as you go through the document with your brilliant comments. It says, including the voices and wisdom of those who have overcome are often unrecognized and undervalued. And it just talks about sharing the work across these sectors is essential to effectively address the complex and evolving issue. And so you go through the bullets. Governments must adopt a whole of government approach. Civil society organizations play a crucial role. Businesses must prioritize. And finally, individuals need to take responsibility. And so this is something that is inclusive of everyone. And so you have this document. Please go through it. And right now, with the last 4 minutes or so, any questions that you may have, please feel free to ask. Any questions? No? Oh, well done. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You said, well said, thank you so much. You said, please provide some information about the forum on AU. Well done. Thank you. Impactful. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much. And so what I'm doing is sort of chairing this with Brian and Free the Slaves and all of you. All we're doing is putting your thoughts, your ideas, and your brilliance on paper, because we need for there to be just a motivated, sort of collaborative, at least an 85% agreement. Yes, this is amazing foundational document, and we can run with this to change the world together, and to prevent victims all over the world, and to serve those that are there, especially those hidden in different industries and farms and agriculture and mines, labor, sex trafficking, all over the world. This is a beautiful presentation. Well done. And thank you. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much. Someone says, please couldn't download the documents, help send to my email. Brian Lorith, I'm going to put, if you look in the chat, Brian, she tried to download the document. She's not
Working
able
on
to.
it right now. I'll send it out.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think that I can stop sharing now. I think I'm done. If there are no more questions or comments, I'll pass it back to Davina or Giselle.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everyone. Okay. So, sorry about that. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Bello. That is always such a helpful discussion and helpful way to conclude everything for today. Tomorrow, we will be reconvening at 11 a.m. GMT. And with that, Dr. Balfour, are there any closing housekeeping remarks?
No housekeeping, just thank you to all of our speakers today. You all were awesome. This was an amazing second day of the forum. Thank you all. For those of you who are looking, if you go into your emails, maybe it went to your spam, you definitely would have gotten the narrative Dr. Bello spoke about last week. And again, we resent it yesterday. So if you go into your messages, you would have gotten an email inviting you to be a part of this discussion so you can read. You still have time to participate by giving your comments on that document. So we encourage you to take time, read the document, and get your input. It's really, really, really important for us to have input. We've gotten input from persons from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from North America, and from Europe. So we really need to get the African perspective in this narrative. So thank you so much, Dr. Bello, for pushing through the technological issues, as you know. For everyone who are part of this, we look forward to an awesome third day of the forum. We have some amazing discussions that will be coming out tomorrow. We'll be focusing on survivor engagement. So thank you all again, and see you tomorrow.
Giselle, hold on, one more housekeeping note. So at the very bottom of the chat right now, the first links that I put for downloading the document were from Dropbox. The last two links are from our website, so they're a direct download into your browser. You don't have to go through Dropbox. So I'm going to leave the session open here for about 5 minutes after we close to give people an opportunity to click on those links and download those documents, and then I'll close the session. So just for your convenience, if you're having trouble with the Dropbox links before.
Brian, it's the idea that they're downloading the document, but in order to make comments and to give ideas, they'll go into the Google Doc after they've had their opportunity to read through.
Yes, we're gonna have to send. We're gonna have to once we get that document sent up, we'll send out that link where people can make their comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day. See you all tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.